Welcome to the second class, dear students, and today we are going to discuss about the Indian history of international trade, where how India was done the international trade and where we are, in a period of time many centuries back, and what is the development of Indian trade, and then we will be back to the GATT, the GATT principles and the formation of GATT, which we ended in the first class. So, if as we have already said that, so we are going to cover the Indian and international trade and also the GATT 1947 in this particular lecture. So, we already said that the formation of GATT in the Brettenwood institutions, which we talked about in the last class. So, we will come after the Indian and also the world trade little bit on the statistics, and then we will be back to the GATT. So, here you can see in this particular, definitely it is an IMF data which says that from 1840 to 2020 data. So, it is centuries. So, we can say that centuries old data which shows in a single phase where it show the economic prospects of many countries including India. So, here the data is specifically on per capita GDP for selected economies from 1840 to 2012 they put it, but at that point of time they have made certain projections as well up to 2020. But actually when we look into from 1840 you can see the graph is very low even up to the 1950s and 1960s. So, but from 1970s onwards, especially after the 1950s, you can see all the graphs are going up. Some of the countries like Germany or it is Great Britain, United States and Japan, most importantly Republic of Korea, and the countries like India, developing countries like India, Brazil, the graph is going up. The graph is going up and with a very high speed from the 1950s. So, this shows that how the international merchandise trade can influence the per capita GDP of countries, those who are opened up their economies from the very beginning. So, when we compared with 19th century to the 20th century, there is no comparison of per capita GDP. So, the international trade has made a very crucial role in increasing the per capita or per capita GDP of the selected economies. So, this particular graph very clearly says that what is the development in the 19th century and 20th century in these particular countries, especially the important developed countries like Great Britain, Germany, United States, even you can say that once upon a time very a poor country like Korea. We are talking about South Korea and now it become we can say that a developed country. So, once upon a time there were very poor countries and it suddenly become because of the economic growth and the world trade they become rich countries. So, come back to India. So, sorry. So, come back to India. So, we can see that and one of the largest industries were there in India in once upon a time, especially before 1600, before the Britishers came to India. So, and especially even after immediately after the Britishers came to India in 1700 also, all these large scale industries like mining, metallurgy, textiles, arts and crafts and other industries flourished in India. So, history says that these are flourished immediately after they came to the India, and also the GDP and 1/4 of the GDP, we cannot believe that 1/4 of the world GDP was owned by India at that point of time, 1700. We are talking about a few centuries back, and then you can see the highest share of GDP even close to 25% from in a long period of time. So, India was a richest country in the world from 1 to 1700. So, it means centuries, many centuries India contributed to international trade, and India was a rich country which contributes 25% of the world trade or 25% of the world GDP. So, this has become 25%. So, I have one more slide to show very clearly that what was the Indian contribution, then we will come back to the other slides. So, here you can very clearly say that what was the contribution 25% before 1700, and in 1700 it became 22.6%, and then how it is gone down during the British period to 2.5% in 1950, and unfortunately from 2.5% it is again gone down substantially up to 1991. So, it means a country who owns the world trade. So, or I would say that the world income, 25% of the world trade or share of world trade, and presently equal to us that of 27, 28 countries of the India, Europe, equal to us that of. So, presently the share of Europe is 23.3%. So, and so you can see that India was a richest country once upon a time, and after independence also. So, this is decreased rather increased. So, our percentage of the contribution has gone down substantially up to 2015. So, you can see a surge of share in world trade India after 2015 only. Remember, and now you can see that 99.98% of the world GDP is owned by 164 WTO member countries, and these 164 countries constitute 99.35% of the world population. So, what I want to say is that once upon a time India was a great country, India was a rich country, and how it is sharply become 25% to 2.5% in 1947, or I would say that 1950 up to independence, 25% to 2.5%. So, the Britishers have completely exploited the country like colonized countries like India, and exploited the resources and taken away the entire raw materials from the countries like India. And also the history says that India has a very strong history of its fleets, its ships. So, it is specifically it is mentioned that the Indian merchant navy have 40,000 ships. Can you imagine during the Akbar's period? So, there were 40,000 merchant ships. So, we have so even though it is 40,000 to the numbers are 40, whether it is 40,000 or 34,000 does not matter. The historical records which shows that India have a very strong fleet of this merchant navy, which played a crucial role in the contribution of world trade of India at that point of time up to Britishers. So, you can see the gold production. India was one of the largest gold producing countries at that point of time, and definitely you export the gold and you earn from these the production of gold. So, here you can see that even during the British time also India was one of the largest producer of gold. What does it mean? It means that we were producing, at the same time the raw materials, as raw materials it is taken away from India, and it is colonial masters made wealth out of the Indian resources. So, it became 25% to 2.5% in a period of very small period of time. So, here the comparison between the two countries, that is India and Britain. So, you can very well see that how the Britain has prospered from 1600. I would say that they came to India in 1600, then 1600 to is in 1947. So, there is the how India from the position of number 1, how they become by 1950s to what position. It clearly shows the year wise. So, centuries, many centuries. So, how the India has one of the richest countries in the world for many centuries, and we become the prosperity become how it can came down during these colonialized periods. So, all these data which shows that India was a rich country for centuries and centuries. And also we can see that the India was a major player in export market of for textiles even up to 18th century and 19th century. As I told you, it was a monopoly of dyeing was a trade secret of Indians. Dyeing of textiles was a trade secret of Indians even up to the 19th century. And so, again, so we already said that, so India was contributing 25% to the world trade industrial output in once upon a time. That is even after 1750 also. So, it is fallen to 2% in 1900. So, in a small, I said that in the history of world trade, the rich countries become poor countries, because in a course of international trade, these countries are subject to colonization and they become poor countries. So, India is one of the best example of a rich country, it become a poor country. So, once upon a time India contributed 25% of the world industrial output and world trade, it become a single digit number by 1900. So, it was 2.5% in 1950, and again it gone down during the entire period up to 2015, and only you can see the number goes up after 2015. So, it shows that the international trade have a great influence on countries to become rich and poor. So, we have already seen this particular data, but you can see that. So, India become almost bankrupt in 1991. India, one of the richest country in the world once upon a time, which contributed almost 25% of the world trade and the world income, has dropped down. It's become a bankrupt country in 1991, and we were no money to pay for the outside debt at that point of time. So, we were forced to open, the immediate effect was that we were availed an IMF loan to survive, to pay off the debt, and we took a IMF loan, and also as a result of that particular loan, we agreed to the conditionalities of the IMF to open up our economy. So, we opened up our economy in 1991, which again we saw resulted in a raise in our contribution to the world economy. Even in 2018 it is reached to 3.9, and from 2018 again it is going down, and it reached in 2023 around 2.5%. So, it means that, so it took centuries. So, it will take centuries to reach, to show some express prosperity in the world trade, and your country become rich. So, 25% to 2%, still we are in 2%. So, that is the contribution of India. So, when we look into the merchandise trade growth, so you can see that from 1990, we are taking 1995, the WTO came into existence. You can see a substantial increase in merchandise trade is from 1995, and the world GDP also. But when compared to the merchandise trade has trade growth, you can see the green line, which shows that from 1995 onwards there is a sudden surge from 2 to if you take a period of 95 to 2000, there is 2 to 2.4, there is an increase in the world trade growth or GDP growth. And when it sees the red line, the world GDP growth rate, so you can see that it is almost stagnant even from 1992. So, even going down by 2015. So, the world mercantile trade has increased and the trade growth also increased, but the world GDP is not increasing as compared to as that of the mercantile trade and the world the trade growth. So, this world trade versus GDP is again a misnomer. So, trade is increasing and trade growth is also, there is substantial growth, but the world GDP growth rate is not as good as that of the mercantile trade. The mercantile trade is again increasing. So, this is a very recent data. I have taken it from this IMF, sorry, from the World Bank database, which says that the data from 1950 to 2022. So, this shows the world trade. So, you can see that from 1950 onwards, the world trade volume, has increased many fold. So, if it is 1950, you take it as a 0 and it has reached even up to 4,500 in 2022 last year. So, world trade is phenomenal, especially you can find it after 1995. The constitution of WTO. So, that is the importance of this particular course. So, there is a sudden increase in the volume of world trade and also the value of world trade after constitution of the World Trade Organization. So, it is very necessary to study the rules and regulations dealing with WTO. So, this evolution of this world trade from 1950 very clearly shows that the trade have an impact on the economy of developed countries as well as developing countries. So, here when we talked about GATT and we will discuss more about it, but world trade today if we look into the volume is 45 times, that means there are 4,500 times growth rate from 1950 to 2022. So, this is the World Bank data which clearly shows 4,500 times the world trade increased. So, 1947 the GATT came into existence. From up to 1995 the GATT has prevailed. From 1995 to 2023 the WTO regime is going on. So, we can say that there is a total of 4,500% growth, the phenomenal growth of international trade during the GATT and WTO. So, you can say that so as I told you that there are many times and trade values. The trade value also, it is not only the volume, trade value also increased 400 times from 1950 levels. So, basically it is not only the volume increased, the value also increased many times. So, the volume, and you can see the volume and value graph has increased many fold from 1995. So, it says that around since the average growth rate in 2022, you can see that it is expanded to 4% and 6%, world trade and volume has expanded to 4% 6% on average from 1995 onwards. So, it means the growth rate is phenomenal because of the constitution of the GATT arrangement as well as especially after 1995 the constitution of WTO. Here again the World Bank has come out with these the values. So, this is also from 1950. So, you see how the value of world trade has fluctuated during certain economic crisis, especially the economic crisis in 2008 and also recently definitely 2019-20 or 21, especially because of the pandemic, we can see a fluctuation. But up to 2006 or 7 from 1950 onwards, the trade value in, you can see the $billion, even it reached 1600 USD $billion. And even though it in 2008 it met with the economic crisis, then again it is recovered and it reached, even though up and downs you can see from 2008 onwards, but in 2022 you can reach, again it is reached to the phenomenal level of 2500 US $billion. So, this is international trade, how the international trade can influence the countries. So, now you saw the value, now you saw the volume, and definitely this World Bank data shows that the volume increased, GDP increased, and the value of exports world trade also increased, not decreased from the 1950 onwards. So, this data is on India. So, India is selling what and importing what, from which are those countries. Why I included this particular data? That we know that who is our trading partners. This is a very recent data, again from the World Bank data. It says that who is India's trading partners. So, our trading partner, the number one trading partner is China. So, you can see the value as well. Then it goes like UAE is the second largest trading partner, and United States is only third. Then again goes Saudi Arabia, Russian Federation. Then it's, and we can see some of the surprise countries like Iraq, Indonesia, Singapore, South Korea, Australia. Then small countries like Hong Kong, Qatar, and the up to 31 countries are mentioned. Even we have a very good trade relationship with even Argentina. So, you can see the value, and the most important thing which you can find is the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries together, in between you can find Qatar, you can find Oman, and you can find the Saudi Arabia, and you can find Kuwait, and also you can find yes, definitely Qatar, and also some of the other countries which we can find, including Iran, Southeast Asia or West Asian countries, some of these countries. So, these are the Indian trading partners, and India is importing goods. The largest trading partner of India is, these are the present countries. So, you can see that you take the Silk Route. So, again you can see those countries, and China, definitely the Silk Road passes through, and then to the Mesopotamia at that point of time, whether it is Iran or Iraq countries, and from there to the European countries. And on the other hand, so to the Gulf countries, the Gulf countries are always the transit point of Indian spices and precious metals to the western countries, even time immemorial period. So, again you can find the Gulf countries are trading partners, and definitely the oil also includes. So, it is the separate blocks which we can find what we do trade with whom. So, these data very clearly shows that and whom are our trading partners. Then if you look into the challenges to the world trade, so we can see that in some of the cases the United States will come back to the GATT and WTO very soon, but we can clearly say that the United States will come up with certain good ideas like ITO, and then later on they will withdraw. Like these now presently they are so very well objecting to the appointment of appellate body members in the dispute settlement system, non-cooperation. So, this is a part of the world politics, but it is a part of world international trade as well. It is affecting international trade, and the evolution of these societies all over the world there is a close political, economic and also geopolitical interest. This also plays a crucial role in international trade. So, these the crucial roles will continue, and then we will come back to the GATT. So, the last class which we stopped in the formation of the GATT or the Brettenwood institutions. So, you can see the Havana Conference. The Havana Conference happened in Cuba in 1947. So, they come out with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Employment. So, the basic objective was to form 3 organizations which we already talked about, and the one was International Monetary Fund, and second was the IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction of the Europe, and then the third was the international the ITO, that is International Trade Organization. The 2 organizations were took off, and the third organization, the most important trade organization, International Trade Organization ITO, was mainly is not at all, it is took off mainly because of the non-cooperation. The American president has declared that they are not going to approve it. So, it is failed, the ITO was failed, but the GATT has emerged. The GATT has signed by is at that point of time by the countries in order to reduce the tariffs. So, the GATT came into existence from 1948 onwards. So, as the Havana Conference, the emergence of GATT, the GATT has ruled the international trading system for 47 years up to 1995. So, we can see there is a lot of up and downs from 1947 to 1995, and there are many people those who are contributed, to the development of the GATT and the WTO system. So, the mainly, as I told you, the Havana Conference was for the establishment of ITO, which was never happened. But it is very interesting to see the charter, what the charter says. The charter says that recognizing the determination of the United Nations to create conditions of stability and well-being which are necessary for peaceful and friendly relations among nations, the parties to this charter undertake in the field of trade and employment to cooperate with one another and with the United Nations. So, the objective was very clear, to form a trade organization which was not happened at that point of time. So, the proposal was to make the international trade very smooth, and also the proposal was to remove all possible trade barriers to the international trade, which will ultimately contribute to international peace and security, and also the cooperation between states. So, the US Secretary of State at that point of time, the Gordon Hull, who contributed immensely to the US policy at that point of time. So, in a period of time, especially after the Second World War, in order to formulate various economic policies of the US, who said that, so what is the US policy or economic policy at that point of time? He said that, I quote, "Our nation and every nation can enjoy sustained prosperity only in a world which is at peace. A peaceful world is possible only when there exists for it a solid economic foundation, and indispensable part of which is active and mutually, you can see, beneficial and made among the nations." I unquote. So, he very clearly said what is the relationship between peaceful, because his statement is on the background of economic crisis and the 2 wars, the First World War and the Second World War. So, the people very clearly, the US position is very clearly said. So, this economic position is connected with trade, and again you can see that we already said that there is lot of restrictions were put by the countries in the Great Depression of 1930s. For example, the US has enacted the Smooth-Havli Tariff Act to increase the tariffs to the tune of more than 20,000 products, especially it comes from Canada and UK. So, even though Mr. Gordon Hull was the propounder of free trade, who is considered to be the champion of free trade, but forced to impose more and more tariffs. And at the same time, you can see the main negotiator of the international trade from UK, from Britain, was Sir Richard Stafford Cripps, who was throughout his the presidency of the British board. He participated in the all conferences for the liberalization of trade. So, actually he opposed the US position, and what he said that, so US position of American free trades, American free trade is. So, here you he argued for elimination of all tariffs rather than specific tariffs on US. So, he argued for there was a conflict of interest between America and Britain at that point of time. So, probably that may be the reason ITO was never came into effect. So, what we want to say is that the economic crisis has greatly affected the countries, and the two worlds, especially the Second World War, which was affected, worsened the economic scenario in all the countries, and also the unemployment has contributed. These unemployment and economic crisis contributed to the outburst of the devastating Second World War. And again we can see that immediately after the Second World War, so some of the remarkable achievements through the international economic treaty making which was happened through this Atlantic Charter, and which ultimately end up in the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade 1947 as a part of the Brettenwood institutions. But ITO was never happened, but GATT was came into, because of ITO never came into existence, the GATT was established as an agreement and a small arrangement. So, you can see the copy of the Atlantic Charter, which says Atlantic Charter, which the United States President, what he says, and also the Prime Minister, the Wilson Churchill, also what they are talking about. So, the Atlantic Treaty between US and UK, which talks about the opening of economies at that point of time. So, sorry, the economic charter between the two countries contributed again to the development of GATT. So, when countries to the establishment of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, 23 countries participated. 23 countries participated at that point of time. So, the Bretton Woods institutions were established in 1944, except ITO, the IMF was established, the IBRD was established, but the ITO never came into existence, mainly because of the non-cooperation of the United States. So, if you look into from 1944 Bretton Woods institutions, and then it took another 3 more years to establish GATT in 1947, and then to 1994 the establishment of WTO, then 1995 to till date the working of the WTO. So, as I said that from 1947, even though the GATT was established in 1947, because the countries know that the ITO was never going to come up, but it took 3 more years to announce by the United States that they are not going to sign the ITO charter. Because even though many agreements were entered between nations for reducing the tariffs, and even we look into these the GATT arrangement, 45,000 tariff lines are agreed upon between parties in GATT 1947. So, we know that through international agreement, one international arrangement, I would say that international arrangement of GATT, there is a substantial liberalization of trade, reduction of tariffs among the countries, even though there was a moderate starting of 23 countries, the number has increased. I already said that 45,000 tariff concessions were declared. At that point of time, it was worth $10 billion US, which was a huge amount at that point of time. So, this group of 23, the group of 23 definitely including the founding member, India was one of the member at that point of time in GATT as well. Then it is there was a protocol provisional application, and then the countries gradually increased, the number of countries gradually increased. So, in one way the death of ITO was an advantage to the GATT system, the GATT agreement, which reduced a number of tariffs, and this arrangement, a mere arrangement of GATT, which has existed from 1947 to 1995 up to the end of Uruguay round of negotiations. So, it is ruled, this particular agreement has ruled for a many period of time through different negotiation periods and different negotiations. And we said that GATT was a watershed in the history of international trade, because even it is only started with the 23 countries, they have agreed to reduce to the tune of 45,000 tariff concessions, and at that point of time, which amount to 1/10 of the total world trade. The concessions were not small at that point of time, 1/10 of the total world trade they were agreed upon. And if we come to this GATT, how it has happened, and I would say that it is happened through two important cardinal principles of GATT, and these two cardinal principles are, one is the most favored nation treatment, and most favored nation treatment, it simply the name itself says. So, is that the most favorable terms is extended to everybody. And then reciprocity, the principle mandates that all the benefits should be given to all contracting parties, and reciprocal tariff reductions. You also reduce, I will also reduce. So, the tariff reductions were put it as schedules. So, and the two cardinal principles in WTO, we can see that the most favored nation treatment and national treatment principles are put in WTO as the two cardinal principles. So, it is transferred from the GATT to the WTO. So, the emergence of GATT and these cardinal principles played a crucial role in the tariff concessions. So, this MFN treatment was mostly against the domestic laws like Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 of the US. So, all these countries were forced to amend their domestic law. These domestic laws were put additional duties, and so these principles, any domestic law which is against the principles of most favored nation treatment, they have to amend it. So, the countries like the United States or Canada, they are forced to amend their domestic laws in accordance with the most favored nation treatment. So, if we look into, so what we said already said that the British people were almost against the US policies, and so the especially from so many treaties, they starting with the Franco-British Commercial Treaty of 1860, the Great Britain has argued for the most favored nation treatment, but the US was argued other way around. They are through the even at the time of 1929, through the Smoot-Hawley Act, they imposed more restrictions on imports from UK and Canada. So, the most favored nation treatment is one of the cardinal principles, mainly because of the contribution of UK to the GATT principles. So, most of the Commonwealth countries are benefited out of this most favored nation treatment. So, again you can see that you can say that the progressive integration of commercial or commercial integration of countries will happen only when there is no protectionist measures against each other. So, in response, we already said that in response to the Great Depression in 1930, the US has made domestic laws, and the UK also have made domestic laws, even Canada also have made domestic laws. So, there is a conflict of interest between the great parties at that point of time, those who are party to the Second World War, the UK and US at that point of time. So, quickly if we look into the different arguments, we already said that the US Secretary of State, the Gordon Hull at that point of time. So, even though so he was argued for these MFN clause. So, reciprocal trade agreements, the US was forced to agree to the UK argument of MFN clause later on. And also some of the preference trade with UK was the US was forced to remove it after the Second World War. So, you can find some of the agreements like the Atlantic Charter and then this Lend-Lease agreement of 1941, then also the Anglo-American Financial and Commercial Agreement of 1945. So, all tariff concessions or bilateral trade agreements has been amended in order to comply with the GATT provisions later on. So, the British positions, as I already said that the Sir Richard Stanford Cripps, who was the arguing for the upholding of MFN clause, they very clearly said that we are against American free traders, and but at the same time the most favored nation treatment should be given to all the countries those who participate in the GATT system. So, you can see these the two people those who were arguing during the GATT period, GATT negotiators from the US side, this Clayton, the US lead negotiator, and Richard Stafford Cripps, who was the UK negotiator, those who shaped the provisions of the GATT agreement. So, these people played a very crucial role in shaping the GATT agreement. So, as I told you that, so here even though there was difference of opinion between these two countries, they came to a common platform of GATT 1947. So, even you can find there is economic crisis during GATT period, especially during the 1970s. You can find they faced acute balance of payment problems by some of the countries. So, definitely the protocol provisions immediately came to existence, and then the GATT inconsistent legislations were forced to amend by the countries in consonance with the GATT provisions. So, we already talked about the Brettenwood institutions. So, we are not going to discuss more about the Brettenwood institutions. So, out of 3 institutions, two institutions. So, the International Monetary Fund and International Bank for Reconstructions came into effect, and unfortunately the ITO was never came into because of the US policies and the Havana Charter. So, the Havana Charter has contributed to the development of the 2 existing organizations, that is Bretton Woods institutions, that is one is the World Bank and the other one is the International Monetary Fund, and the ITO mandate was shifted to the GATT. So, we already said that these 2 institutions and the third institution was dead, mainly because of the non-cooperation of United States and the declaration of the US President Truman in 1951 that they are not going to sign the ITO charter at that point of time. So, those who are it was easy for the transition. So, those who are worked the secretariat, the Indian secretariat worked for the ITO was transferred to the secretariat of GATT at that point of time. So, the people those who are familiar with the negotiations, they become part of the GATT 1947, which was ruled from 1947 to 1995. So, we can find from there are lot of negotiations in between from 1947 to 1995 one by one. So, the GATT establishment was cornerstone of the international trade. So, we already talked about the tariff concessions and what was its effect. So, here we can see that the effect of GATT, the formation of GATT was in the history of the watershed in the history of World Trade Organization, the formation of World Trade Organization, and you can see that the circumstances, especially the First World War and the Second World War, contributed to the formation of the Bretton Woods institutions. Out of 3, 2 came into existence and the third one was never came into existence, that was the ITO, but the GATT was established, and which lead to the lot of tariff concessions to the tune of 45,000, and to the tune of even 10 billion US dollars at that point of time, 1/5 of the world trade at that point of time. So, GATT establishment was the opening of economies all over the world and tariff concessions all over the world, and the GATT was never dead, and presently also the GATT is a part of the WTO agreements. So, we will stop here, and the next class we will see the establishment of the WTO and from GATT to WTO, and we will see in the next class. Thank you.